Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
I've been an architect for about 12 years now. Most of that time was spent bouncing between firms, learning the ropes, and eventually landing what I thought was a decent position at a mid-sized architecture company. Before this job, I worked at a smaller firm where everyone kind of pitched in on everything. We shared resources, helped each other out, and nobody really sweated the small stuff. So when I moved to this new company, I carried some of those habits with me. Maybe that was my mistake. Or maybe it was theirs. The company had about 30 employees, mostly architects and engineers, plus some admin staff. My boss was the kind of guy who ran everything by the book. And I mean everything. He tracked hours down to the minute, monitored computer usage, and made sure everyone knew the equipment belonged to the company. At first, I thought he was just organized. Later, I realized he was just a control freak. Anyway, this whole thing started because of my daughter's birthday. She was turning 7 and she wanted a unicorn-themed party. My wife handles most of the party planning, but she asked if I could put together the invitations since I'm the one who knows how to use design software. No problem, I figured. I'd just knock it out real quick during my lunch break. So one day, I opened up Photoshop on my work laptop and spent maybe 10 minutes making a cute little invitation. Unicorns, rainbows, my daughter's name in sparkly letters, the whole thing. I saved it to a flash drive, closed the program, and went back to work. Didn't think twice about it. A few days later, my boss and I were sitting at my desk going over a project we were working on. He wanted to see some of the files I've been editing, so I opened up Photoshop to show him. And right there, in the recent files, was the birthday invitation. He stared at it for a second, then asked me what it was. I told him it was just an invitation I made for my daughter's birthday. He clicked on it, and the unicorn invitation popped up on screen. He looked at it like I'd just shown him evidence of a crime. He asked if I had used the company laptop to make it. I told him yeah. It only took a few minutes during lunch. He then told me in a stern voice that the computer was for work only and that I couldn't use company equipment for personal projects. I just said okay. What else was I supposed to say? He was technically right. The laptop belonged to the company. I wasn't going to argue about a 10-minute birthday invitation. That same week, my boss assigned me to travel to another city to survey a building we were considering for a renovation project. It was about a 2-hour flight away. The company booked my flights, paid for my hotel, and gave me a per diem for food. Standard stuff for site visits. I packed up my tape measure and laser measuring tool, both provided by the company, and headed out. The survey itself went smoothly. I measured everything I needed, took detailed notes, and documented the layout. When I got back to the office the next day, my boss called me into his office. He asked if I had downloaded the photos yet because he wanted to see the inside of the building. I told him I hadn't taken any photos. He stared at me like I just told him I forgot to bring the building back with me. He asked what I meant and how he was supposed to see what the interior looked like. I explained that I didn't have a work phone and that my personal phone was personal. His face went through about 5 different emotions in 3 seconds. Confusion, then realization, then frustration, then anger, and finally a kind of forced calm, because he knew exactly what had happened. About 4 months earlier, I had asked the company for a work phone. Site visits required documentation, and I didn't feel comfortable using my personal device for company business. I paid for my own phone plan. I had personal photos and messages on there. It wasn't a work tool. My boss had denied the request. He said the company didn't provide phones to architects at my level and that most people just used their personal phones for site photos. I'd accepted that at the time, but I'd also made a mental note. If my personal phone was personal, then it stayed personal. Simple as that. And now here we were. He told me I should have used my phone. I replied that my phone was personal and reminded him that he had told me company equipment was for work only. I said I assumed the same rule applied both ways. He opened his mouth to say something, then closed it. He knew he couldn't argue. He'd literally lectured me, about not using company equipment for personal stuff less than a week ago. How could he now demand I use my personal equipment for company stuff? He sat there for a long moment, visibly trying to keep his composure. Finally, he said he would see what he could do. The next morning, I arrived at my desk to find a brand new Samsung phone sitting there in its box. A sticky note on top said to see HR to get it set up on the company plan. My boss came by later that morning looking like he'd swallowed something sour. He told me I was going to need to go back. I asked him back where, and he said to the site to take the photos because they needed documentation of the interior. I asked if he really wanted me to fly back just to take photos. He confirmed that yes, that was exactly what he wanted. So that's exactly what happened. The company booked another round-trip flight. They paid for another night at the hotel. They covered another day of per diem, all because my boss had refused to approve a work phone months earlier and then had the nerve to lecture me about using company equipment for personal use. The second trip was honestly kinda nice. I already knew the building, so the survey part was quick. I spent the rest of the time taking thorough photos with my shiny new company phone, then grabbed a nice dinner on the company's dime. When I got back and uploaded the photos, my boss reviewed them without saying much. He never brought up the birthday invitation again. He also never lectured me about personal use of company equipment after that. I did the math later. The first trip had cost the company probably around $800 between flights, hotel, and food. The second trip cost about the same. Plus the new phone was probably another $600 or $700. All in all, my boss's rigid policy about a 10-minute Photoshop project ended up costing the company over $2,000. Even as a kid, I couldn't sit still through a movie without picking at something, folding paper, or twisting rubber bands around my fingers. My grandmother noticed this before anyone else did, and instead of telling me to stop fidgeting, she put a crochet hook in my hands when I was 7 years old. By the time I was 10, I'd moved on to knitting needles too. It wasn't until I was much older that I got the official diagnosis, ADHD. Suddenly, a lot of things made sense. Why I couldn't sit through lectures without my mind floating away to some random thought about whether fish get thirsty. Why reading was a nightmare, made even worse by the dyslexia that came along for the ride. Why I needed something, anything, to occupy my hands if I wanted my brain to actually absorb what was happening around me. Medication wasn't an option for me. I tried. I really did. I went through trial after trial, different doses, different types. Every single one left me either so drowsy I could barely function, or so nauseous I couldn't keep food down. Some of them just did nothing at all. The side effects meant I couldn't work a full-time job, and I love my job. So I made the choice to manage my ADHD without medication and find my own ways to cope. University was where I really figured out my system. I started bringing my knitting and crochet projects to lectures. The first time I did it, I was terrified someone would say something, but when I asked my lecturers about it, they were surprisingly supportive. One of them even told me she'd read studies about how repetitive hand movements could help people with attention difficulties focus better. As long as it helped me learn, she said, I could do whatever I needed. So that's what I did. I knitted my way through 3 years of university, and I came out with better marks than I ever expected. Fast forward to now, I work in an office setting and my job involves a lot of meetings, video conferences, online training sessions, group discussions that can stretch on for 3 or 4 hours sometimes. For most people, that's just a long day. For me, it's a mental marathon where my brain tries to escape out the nearest window within the first 30 minutes. I brought this up with my manager during one of our supervision sessions. I told her I was struggling to stay focused during longer meetings, that I kept drifting off and missing important information about our service users. She asked if I'd ever tried doing something with my hands, since she knew some people found that helpful for focus. I mentioned that I used to knit and crochet during university lectures, and that it really helped me stay on track. She told me I should try doing that here at work too. As long as I was still participating and taking notes, she didn't see why it would be a problem. So I started bringing my projects to work. Small things, socks, hats, simple squares in one color. Nothing complicated that would actually require me to look at what I was doing. I've been crocheting and knitting for over 20 years now. My hands know what to do without my eyes needing to supervise. I kept everything on my lap out of the way. My notebook or laptop stayed on the table for notes. When I needed to speak, I put the project down. When I needed to write something, I put it down. I wasn't sitting there ignoring everyone while I focused on making a sweater. I was more engaged than I'd ever been. For the in-person meetings, I stuck to crochet since it only uses one hook and doesn't make any noise. Knitting I saved for the online meetings since the clicking of needles wouldn't bother anyone through a screen. And it worked. Really worked. I was participating more, remembering details about our service users that I would have completely missed before, actually contributing to discussions instead of sitting there with glazed eyes, trying to figure out what we were even talking about. Then came my colleague. He approached me after a meeting one day, and I could tell from his expression that he wasn't coming over for a friendly chat. He told me we needed to talk about what I was doing in meetings. When I asked what he meant, he said I needed to stop with the knitting and crochet and whatever it was. I told him I didn't understand and asked if it was bothering him. He said it was rude and disrespectful to everyone in the room and to the service users we were discussing. He said I should be paying attention instead of working on my little hobby. I tried to stay calm. I explained that this actually helped me focus, that I had ADHD, and that doing something with my hands kept me engaged. I told him that without it, I zoned out completely. He said he didn't care what I had. He said it looked unprofessional and that people saw me knitting and thought I wasn't taking the meeting seriously. I told him I understood how it might look, but that I'd already cleared this with my manager and that she was the one who suggested I find something to do with my hands. He said he thought she was wrong. Then he told me that if I didn't stop, he was going to bring this to the higher-ups. He walked away before I could respond. I stood there for a moment trying to process what had just happened. I'd done everything right. I talked to my manager. I'd gotten permission. I kept my projects small and quiet and out of the way. I put them down when I needed to speak or take notes. I wasn't ignoring anyone. I was actually paying more attention than I ever had before. But none of that mattered to him. The threat to go to the higher-ups rattled me. Even though I had my manager's approval, the idea of being called out in front of senior staff made my stomach turn. What if they sided with him? What if they didn't understand? What if they saw it as unprofessional regardless of the reason behind it? Over the weekend, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I talked to friends, I looked online for advice, I tried to figure out if I was in the wrong. Was what I was doing really that disrespectful? I wasn't knitting during formal company-wide presentations. These were small team meetings, 6 to 15 people, mostly group discussions. Everyone knew each other. The atmosphere was casual. We wore smart, casual clothes. It wasn't some rigid corporate environment. And the service users he mentioned, they weren't even in the meetings. These were professional discussions about them planning sessions for their mental health care. I worked on a therapy team. I knew better than anyone how to conduct myself in front of clients. But these meetings were just us, the staff. By Monday, I'd made my decision. I walked into my manager's office before the day's first meeting and asked if she had a minute to talk. I explained what my colleague had said, the threat to go to higher-ups, how worried it had made me. My manager listened without interrupting. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair. She thanked me for telling her and said she wished he'd come to her directly instead of confronting me like that. I asked if I was actually doing something wrong. She told me I wasn't. She said I'd asked permission and that I've been more engaged in meetings than I ever was before. She said she'd noticed it, and so had others. What I was doing wasn't disrespectful. It was an accommodation that helped me do my job better. I asked what would happen if he did go to the higher-ups. She said she'd handle it, but she thought we should address this proactively. She asked how I'd feel about her bringing it up at the start of our next team meeting. We could explain the situation, let people ask questions if they had them, and make sure everyone understood. I nodded and told her I thought that would help. The meeting was the next day. My manager started it by addressing the room. She said that before we got into our agenda, She wanted to discuss something that had been brought to her attention. She explained that some people may have noticed that I sometimes crocheted or knitted during meetings. She told them this was something she'd approved as an accommodation for ADHD. She said it helped with focus and allowed for better participation in these long discussions. Then she opened the floor for anyone who had questions or concerns. Silence for a moment. Then one of my other colleagues spoke up and said she thought it was brilliant. She mentioned she'd been struggling to stay focused in these meetings herself. Another colleague said he didn't even notice I was doing it until now and that it wasn't like I was ignoring anyone. A third one said whatever helps, right? And that we were all here to do our jobs. I looked around the room. Most people were nodding. A few looked indifferent, which was fine. Then my eyes landed on him, the one who'd confronted me. He was sitting with his arms crossed, jaw tight. When my manager asked if anyone had objections, he didn't say a word. After the meeting, I expected him to approach me again. He didn't, but over the next few weeks, I noticed him watching me during discussions, like he was waiting for me to slip up, to prove that I wasn't really paying attention. So I made sure I was. Every meeting, I participated more actively than anyone else. I asked questions. I took thorough notes. I remembered details about our service users that others forgot. I made it impossible for him to claim I wasn't engaged. A month later, we had a meeting where a complex case came up. Multiple agencies involved, lots of moving parts. The kind of thing where details get lost easily. At the end of the discussion, our manager asked if anyone had caught everything. I said I had it. The timeline, the agency contacts, the care plan adjustments, all of it. I read through my notes. Thorough, organized, complete. My manager said it was perfect and thanked me. She said that was exactly what we needed. I didn't look at my colleague. I didn't need to. But I did notice that he stopped watching me after that. Stopped making comments under his breath when I pulled out my crochet hook. Stopped acting like I was somehow insulting him by managing my own brain in a way that actually worked. My hands stayed busy. My mind stayed focused, and my little hobby, as he called it, kept me at the top of my game. I'm a single mom to my 10-year-old daughter. It's been just the two of us since she was 3, when her father decided that being a dad was too much responsibility and disappeared. I work as a night shift supervisor at a warehouse, which means I'm usually exhausted, but it also means I've built up some serious strength over the years. I'm not a small woman by any means. I stand at 5'10", and I've got the build of someone who spends 8 hours a night lifting boxes and moving pallets. I'm not someone you want to mess with, and I certainly am not someone whose child you want to mess with. From the moment my daughter could understand words, I drilled stranger dangers into her head. We practiced scenarios. We had code words. I taught her that no adult she doesn't know should ever ask a child for help, and if they do, she needs to find me or another trusted adult immediately. I taught her that her body is her own and nobody, and I mean nobody, has the right to touch her without her permission. These weren't just casual conversations. They were survival lessons. The world isn't kind to little girls, and I wanted mine prepared. Last Saturday started like any other weekend. My daughter and I headed to our local grocery store to pick up stuff for the week. She's at that age where she wants a little independence, so I let her wander to the cereal aisle to pick out something she wanted while I grabbed some produce. The cereal aisle was literally just one aisle over. I could hear the squeaky wheels of other carts passing by. Then I heard it. My daughter scream. Not a mom look at this scream. A real terrified, pain-filled scream. I dropped my basket and ran. I rounded the corner, and what I saw made my blood turn to ice and then immediately to fire. Some woman, probably in her 50s, had my daughter by the ear. Not just holding it, twisting it. My baby was on her tiptoes trying to relieve the pressure, tears streaming down her face, and this woman was yanking her around like she had any right to touch my child. Karen was yelling at my daughter, saying this is what happens to rude little girls who don't help adults when they're asked, and that she needed to learn some manners. My daughter was sobbing and trying to explain that I told her not to talk to strangers and begging the woman to let go because she was hurting her. Karen snapped back that she wasn't a stranger, she was an adult, and that children do what adults tell them to do. I didn't think. I just moved. I hit Karen like a freight train. We both went down hard, her back slamming against the linoleum floor. She tried to push me off, but I outweighed her by at least 60 pounds, and I had rage on my side. I pinned her down, and I started swinging. I'm not proud of it, but I'm not ashamed either. Every hit was for every tear on my daughter's face, for every bruise that was probably forming on her ear. I was screaming at her to never touch my daughter again, to never put her hands on my child. Karen was screaming for help, trying to cover her face. She kept yelling that I was crazy and that she was just disciplining my daughter. I told her my daughter wasn't hers to discipline. People were gathering around. Someone was yelling to call 911. I didn't care. I kept her pinned until I felt hands on my shoulders, pulling me back. It took 2 store employees to get me off her. My daughter ran to me the second I was standing, burying her face in my side and sobbing. Her ear was bright red and already starting to swell. I held her tight and looked at Karen, who was still on the floor, nose bleeding, already starting to bruise. One of the store employees told me I needed to step back and that the police were coming. I said good, that I wanted to press charges against this woman for assaulting my daughter. Karen managed to sit up and pointed at me with a shaking finger. She demanded that I be arrested and claimed she barely touched my kid. An older man who'd seen the whole thing spoke up and said that wasn't true. He told everyone he saw Karen grab my little girl's ear and twist it while she was crying and begging her to stop. Karen tried to defend herself by saying my daughter was being disrespectful. She said she had asked my daughter to reach something on a high shelf and my daughter ignored her and walked away. She said children need to learn respect for their elders. I shot back that my daughter walked away because I taught her not to help strangers, and that's exactly what kids are supposed to do. Karen sneered and said maybe if I taught her proper manners instead, this wouldn't have happened. I started toward her again, but the employee held me back. My daughter clung tighter to me. The police arrived about 10 minutes later. They separated us and took statements. Paramedics checked on Karen, who was hamming it up like she'd been hit by a car. They also checked my daughter's ear, documenting the redness, the swelling, and the small cuts where Karen's nails had dug in. I told the officers exactly what happened, how I heard my daughter scream, how I found a stranger twisting her ear, how I did what any mother would do to protect her child. The officer took notes and nodded. He told me that several witnesses had backed up my story and that the store's security footage should show exactly what happened too. Karen was loaded onto a stretcher, still complaining loudly. She kept demanding that I be arrested for assault and pointing at her face, asking if they could see what I did to her. She even accused the police of brutality if they didn't arrest me. The officer just told her she was going to the hospital and that they'd be following up with both parties. Before they wheeled her away, I walked over. The officers watched but didn't stop me. I leaned in close and told her that if she ever touched my daughter again, or if she ever touched any child again, I would make today feel like a warm-up. I asked her if she understood me. She just looked at me, but I saw the fear in her eyes. Good. The officers took my information and said they'd follow up about pressing charges for the assault on my daughter. I gave them everything. My contact info, my willingness to cooperate, everything. I wanted that woman to face what was coming to her. We went home after that. I spent the rest of the day holding my daughter, icing her ear and reassuring her that she did nothing wrong. My daughter asked me quietly if she did the right thing by walking away from Karen. I told her that she did exactly the right thing. She did exactly what I taught her. That woman was wrong, not her, never her. She looked up at me with those big eyes and said I was really scary when I jumped on Karen. I told her I know, but that nobody hurts her. Not while I'm breathing. She actually smiled a little at that. 2 days later, I got a call from the police department. The security footage clearly showed Karen grabbing my daughter and twisting her ear while my daughter cried and tried to pull away. Multiple witnesses had given statements supporting my account. Karen, it turned out, had a history of complaints against her for similar behavior, harassing children in public for perceived disrespect, though nothing had ever been formally charged before. The officer told me that Karen was being charged with assault on a minor and that given her history and the clear video evidence, the district attorney was taking it seriously. They also told me that given the circumstances, they weren't pursuing any charges against me. Protective parental response, they called it. Several officers off the record told me they'd have done the same thing. I don't know what will happen to Karen legally. I don't know if she'll do jail time or just get probation or community service. But I do know that she'll think twice before she ever puts her hands on somebody else's child again, because next time she might run into another mama bear, and next time she might not get off with just a stretcher ride. My grandmother passed away when I was 23. She was 84 years old and had lived a full life, but losing her felt like losing a piece of myself. She raised me from the time I was 7 after my mom left. My dad was working double shifts just to keep the lights on. Grandma Elena stepped in without hesitation. She braided my hair before school, helped me with homework at her kitchen table, and sat through every dance recital and school play. When I got my first job at 16, she was the one who drove me there and picked me up. When I graduated high school, she cried harder than anyone. She always said I was her greatest accomplishment, even though I kept telling her that didn't make sense since she didn't give birth to me. I always knew that if I ever had a daughter, I would name her Elena. It wasn't even a question. I told my grandmother this once when I was about 20, and she got all teary and waved her hand at me like I was being silly. But I could tell it meant everything to her. Fast forward to last year. I found out I was pregnant at 28. The father and I aren't together. We dated for about a year, realized we wanted different things, and split up. When I told him about the pregnancy, he made it clear he wasn't interested in being involved. That stung, but I made peace with it. I had a good job, a supportive family, and I knew I could do this on my own. My dad was thrilled about becoming a grandfather. He's remarried now to a wonderful woman who treats me like her own. My mom resurfaced a few years ago trying to reconnect, but I wasn't interested. Some bridges stay burned. 3 months ago, I gave birth to a beautiful baby girl. I named her Elena, just like I always said I would. I posted a picture of her on social media with a caption introducing her to the world. The response was overwhelmingly positive. My dad cried when he held her for the first time. He said she had grandma's eyes. Then my phone rang. It was my aunt. She's my dad's younger sister and we've never been close. She always had this competitive streak, especially when it came to comparing her kids to me. I answered thinking maybe she was calling to congratulate me. She didn't congratulate me. Instead, she told me we needed to talk about a name situation. I had no idea what she meant, so I asked her what she was talking about. She explained that I couldn't use the name Elena because her daughter-in-law was pregnant and also wanted to name her baby Elena. She said it was going to look like I copied her. I actually laughed out loud because I thought she was joking. I reminded her that my daughter was already born and named and that I had wanted this name for almost a decade. I asked her how I could possibly be copying someone who hadn't even had their baby yet. She insisted that her daughter-in-law had announced her pregnancy first and that they had been planning the name for months. I told her that I had been planning this name since Grandma was alive and that this wasn't up for discussion. Elena was my daughter's name. End of story. There was a pause on the line and then her voice got that cold, condescending tone I remembered from family gatherings. She said that I was unmarried and that I didn't even have the family name. She told me that my daughter wasn't a real member of this family the way her son's child would be. Her grandchild was going to be the real Elena with their last name. My daughter was just, well, she didn't finish that sentence, but she didn't have to. I told her to get lost and hung up. I was shaking when I put the phone down. My daughter was sleeping in her bassinet, completely unaware that someone had just tried to invalidate her existence over a name. I called my dad immediately and repeated the entire conversation to him. I could hear him getting angrier with every word. He told me to give him 20 minutes. I don't know exactly what was said in that phone call, but I got the summary later from my stepmom. Apparently, my aunt called my dad expecting him to side with her. She went on about how I was being selfish, how I was causing family drama, and how I needed to be talked into changing my daughter's name. My dad told her to go pound sand. According to my stepmom, he told my aunt that his mother had raised his daughter when he couldn't, and that woman was a saint. He said I had every right to honor her memory. Then he warned my aunt that if she ever disrespected his granddaughter again, she wouldn't have to worry about family drama because she wouldn't be part of the family anymore. My aunt sputtered something about how he was being unreasonable, and he hung up on her. For the next few weeks, there was radio silence from that side of the family. My cousin, her son, never reached out directly. I don't know if he even knew what his mother had done. We were never close anyway. Then, 2 months after my Elena was born, I saw the announcement on social media. My cousin's wife had given birth to a boy. They named him Elijah. I stared at that post for a solid minute before I started laughing. All that drama, all those phone calls, all that nonsense about how I was stealing a name, how I was copying, how my daughter wasn't a real family member, and they had a boy. They didn't even use the name. I took a screenshot of the announcement and sent it to my dad with a message saying I guessed Elena wasn't that important after all. He replied simply, "Imagine that." We had dinner together that weekend. While we were eating, my stepmom brought up that she had heard Elijah made his grand entrance. I said it was funny how that worked out. My dad joked that if the name was so sacred, you'd think they would have found a way to use it somehow. Maybe Elenio or Eleno or something. My stepmom told him to stop, but she was laughing too. My daughter is 3 months old now. She's starting to smile and coo, and every time I look at her, I see my grandmother. Not just in her features, but in the way she looks at the world with curiosity and calm. I talk to her about her great-grandmother sometimes. I tell her about the woman who raised me, who taught me what love looked like, who showed me that family isn't about last names or marriage certificates. It's about showing up. My aunt hasn't spoken to us since my dad told her off. I'm a junior account coordinator. Basically, I handle the behind-the-scenes stuff for our client accounts, the kind of work that keeps everything running smoothly. When I got hired, I was paired with a coworker who had been there for about 4 years. The idea was that we'd share the workload for our department. We each had our assigned accounts and tasks, but there was some overlap. Our boss made it clear from day one that we needed to function as a team. At first, things seemed fine. My coworker showed me the ropes, explained the systems, introduced me to people. I thought we'd have a good working relationship. Then I started noticing things. Emails that sat unanswered for days. Reports submitted late or with obvious errors. Client requests that fell through the cracks. At first, I figured he was just having a rough week. Everyone has those. But the rough week turned into a rough month, then 2 months, then 6. The first time I covered for him was small. A client emailed asking about a deadline, and I saw the message sitting in the shared inbox for 3 days. I knew our boss would flip out if the client complained, so I just answered it myself. Took me 5 minutes. No big deal. The second time I noticed the report he submitted had the wrong numbers. I quietly fixed it before our boss reviewed it. Again, just a few minutes of my time. But those few minutes started adding up. Before I knew it, I was routinely checking his work, answering his emails, and picking up tasks he ignored. I told myself I was being a team player. I told myself it was better for everyone if I just handled it. The truth was I was terrified. I was still the new person. I didn't want to be seen as difficult or as someone who threw co-workers under the bus. I thought if I just kept things running smoothly, eventually he'd step up, or our boss would notice on her own, or something would change. Nothing changed. If anything, it got worse. The more I covered for him, the more comfortable he got letting things slide. He'd roll in late, take long lunches, spend half the day on his phone. Meanwhile, I was drowning in double the workload. About 3 months ago, I hit a breaking point. I was at the office until 8 at night finishing a report that was supposed to be his responsibility. My mom called and I had to cut her off because I was still working. I missed my friend's birthday dinner. I was exhausted and resentful and angry at myself for letting it get this bad. That night, I made a decision. I was done. No more covering, no more fixing, no more saving him from himself. I would do my job and only my job. The next day, I came in and focused strictly on my assigned tasks. An email came in for one of his accounts. Normally, I would have answered it. Instead, I let it sit. A report was due from him by the end of day. I didn't check it. I didn't fix it. I didn't touch it. It felt weird at first, almost wrong. I kept having to stop myself from jumping in out of habit. But I stayed strong. For the first week, nothing major happened. A few small things slipped through the cracks on his end, but nothing catastrophic. I started to relax a little. Maybe this wouldn't be so bad. Then week 2 hit. A client complained directly to our boss about unanswered emails. The report my co-worker submitted had errors that made it all the way to a presentation. Our boss called a meeting with both of us. My boss sat across from us with this look on her face. Tired, disappointed, frustrated. She asked us what was going on and why there had been 3 client complaints that week along with reports going out full of mistakes. My co-worker immediately jumped in. He said he'd been really swamped lately, that there might have been some miscommunication about who was handling what. He said he thought some of those tasks were being taken care of. He was looking right at me when he said it. Our boss asked who exactly he thought was taking care of those things. He said we were supposed to be a team and that he just assumed certain things were covered. Then he listed off several tasks, things that were clearly his responsibility, things I had been doing for him for months. I stayed quiet for a moment, trying to figure out how to handle this. Then I decided I was done staying quiet. I told our boss that those tasks were all assigned to him and that I could show her the task distribution document we were given when I started. I explained that I'd been doing my assigned work and couldn't speak to what was happening with his. My co-worker's face changed. He looked almost betrayed. He pointed out that I used to help him with that stuff all the time. I told him I helped when I could, but that I wasn't assigned to his accounts and had my own workload to manage. Our boss asked me directly if I had been doing his work. I admitted that I was trying to be a team player and didn't want clients to suffer or for the department to look bad. But I explained that I realized I was falling behind on my own responsibilities because I was spending so much time covering gaps. My co-worker got defensive. He said he never asked me to do his work and that I just did it on my own. I told him he never asked me not to either. I said he saw emails getting answered and reports getting fixed and that he had to know someone was doing it. He accused me of hanging him out to dry. I told him I was just doing my job. That was all I was doing. Our boss held up her hand and said she was going to review the task assignments and work logs. She told us we'd talk again tomorrow. The meeting ended and my co-worker walked off without looking at me. I went back to my desk and tried to focus on my work, but my hands were shaking a little. Over the next few days, things got uncomfortable. My co-worker barely spoke to me. When he did, it was short and cold. A few other people in the office started acting weird around me too. I overheard someone in the break room saying I had thrown him under the bus. That stung. It really did. I had spent months killing myself to keep things afloat, and now I was the bad guy for stopping. But then something else happened. Our boss called another meeting, this time just with my co-worker. I wasn't there, but apparently she had reviewed everything. Work logs, email timestamps, report submissions. The pattern was clear. His work had been consistently subpar, and the only reason it hadn't been caught sooner was because I had been quietly cleaning up after him. He got put on a performance improvement plan, 60 days to get his act together or he'd be let go. After that meeting, he came to my desk and asked if I was happy now. He said I got him in trouble and hoped I felt good about myself. I told him I didn't get him in trouble. He got himself in trouble. I just stopped covering it up. He said we were supposed to be a team. I told him a team means both people do their share. It doesn't mean one person does everything while the other coasts. He didn't have a response to that and he just walked away. The next few weeks were tense. He kept to himself mostly, and a few people in the office seemed to take his side, but others quietly came up to me and said they understood. One person told me they'd noticed the same patterns and wondered how long it would take for things to come to light. About a month into his performance improvement plan, my co-worker quit. He gave 2 weeks' notice and spent most of that time complaining to anyone who would listen about how unfairly he'd been treated. On his last day, he stopped by my desk one more time. He told me he hoped whoever replaced him wouldn't have to deal with someone like me. I told him I hoped whoever worked with him next wouldn't have to do his job for him. He left without another word. A few weeks after that, we hired someone new to fill his position. She's great. She does her work. She communicates. She doesn't expect anyone to clean up her messes. For the first time in almost 2 years, I actually enjoy coming to work. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.